Hey, y'all. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Peace Podcast. This is season 2, episode 25. Just give me freedom from my trauma, whatever that looks like. And so, you know how when you go through an experience and you're 100% sure that the way that you responded or react or the way that you were triggered is related to something that has happened to you in the past or an experience that you've had in another relationship prior to this one, your childhood, another romantic relationship, and you're like, oh, why do I keep doing that? I just want to stop doing that. I just want to be healed from that thing. And then, a couple of weeks later, a similar situation happens and you respond and react the exact same way. And you're like, what in the world is wrong with me? And, I've done this on numerous occasions where I'm like, I don't want to do this anymore. And then I think that I can like white knuckle it in order for that to be the case. And the thing about healing something that has been in you, within you for so long, by just white knuckling is that there are so many things that are attached to that thing. Parts of who you are were developed because of that trauma. The way that you move, the habits that you have are all a product of that trauma. The way that the people who created the trauma or the people who are used to you having those traumas react to you, respond to you, and are in relationship with you are all a product of that trauma. So when you're healing the trauma, you're not just fixing the thing that's within you, but you're modifying and altering and shifting the things that are outside of you who have become accustomed to you being the way that you've always been. So it's not as easy as just saying, I'm so frustrated. I wish I didn't do that anymore. It is more complex than that because there are so many different facets of the way that you respond that are going to need habits changed and altered behaviors, etc. And so if we just walk into it and say, okay, I'm just not going to do that anymore, the reality is you're going to do it again. And so we have to understand our trauma. We have to understand what parts of it take the healing and what the healing needs us to do in order for us to navigate the world in a different way. And so if your past trauma is that, you don't feel like you were enough for your family of origin, and then you took that into relationship and you didn't feel like you were enough for the people you were in relationship with, you're not just going to wake up one morning and speak affirmations to yourself saying, I'm enough, I'm enough, I'm enough. And then all of a sudden you feel like you're enough. There are thought processes that are repeating that narrative of I'm not enough. There are behaviors that are fulfilling that part of the story that says that you're not enough. Who you choose, the person that you choose to do life with, if you don't believe you are enough, will probably repeat the messaging that you're not, or they'll treat you in a way that feels like you're not. If you're somebody who has developed perfectionism as a product of the trauma that you've experienced, waking up in the morning and saying, I'm going to give myself some grace today is a great way to start. But it's not going to just, I snap my fingers and now all of a sudden I don't have perfectionism anymore. I snap my fingers and now all of a sudden I don't feel like I need to control situations anymore. It doesn't work that quickly. And so, what are some major moves that you can make in order to get your feet on the path to the healing journey? Not white knuckle it, not force yourself, not trudge through, because none of those avenues are healing. They're in fact masking. So what are some things that you can focus on, some avenues that you can take to position your feet on that journey so that when you have a really bad day or your trauma strikes you in a way that is intense, or you're triggered in a deeper way that day, that you can go back to those mile markers and start from there instead of going back to the very beginning as this unhealed version of you. And the first thing is that you have to stop blaming them. You have to stop blaming people and break free from the cycle or the pattern. And I understand this one to the nth degree because there was a point in my journey where I told myself, well, if you don't blame people, then you're allowing them to have created this situation in your life and they're getting off scot-free. They don't have to pay for it. They don't have to have a consequence from it, right? And so I felt like in me continuing to tell the story and continuing to have someone to blame, that was at least in part holding them accountable for the part in the process that they had taken in it. And I've learned through navigating this healing journey that is just unforgiveness, and that unforgiveness causes more havoc in the person who isn't forgiving than the person who isn't being forgiven. So if you have somebody who was abusive to you in a relationship and you continue to not forgive them and want to hold them over the flame for the thing that they did to you because they were abusive in the relationship, chances are they've walked into another relationship being just as abusive, if not more abusive, than they were to you when they were in the relationship with you. And you're holding them accountable for being abusive to you in your relationship isn't changing the way that they're navigating the world. So you're creating this chaos inside of you in an effort to make their behavior not permissible because it feels like if you don't hold them accountable, nobody will. But it's doing absolutely nothing because they're not hearing, even if you are texting them or calling them, they're not paying a price for what they did to you. In fact, you're paying a heavier price because the trauma is still in you and now you have unforgiveness layer on top of it. So what do we do? Blaming other people feels good because it feels like validation. It feels like someone did this to me, and now I'm going to make sure that I hold the truth that someone else did this thing to me. And while it feels like that, it's holding you in this purgatory. And the way to break free from it, the way to really focus on that part of healing your trauma is to say, okay, this person did this to me. Now, I, in turn, am going to become a cycle breaker. So my mom parented me this way, and it didn't feel good to me. It created this, and this characteristic inside of me. So I'm going to ensure that I'm not that mother to my daughter. My dad did this thing to me or was this person, and it created this, list of characteristics in me. So I'm going to make sure that I create in my son something that didn't happen or something that's different from that situation. I was in a horrible relationship, and so yes, that person did it to me, but I'm going to make sure that I pick different people and that I no longer am attracted to the type of people who have hurt me in the past. If you continue to focus on the blame that you could, I mean, because they did do it to you, so that exists, the blame that you could keep pursuing, what you're going to end up doing, because what you focus on comes to fruition, is making more situations where you have more people to blame because they bring more trauma into your life. When you focus on being a cycle breaker and changing what has happened to you by eliminating your ability to make those same choices, then what happens is you take control over the cycle being broken and you're focusing on the alternative to that trauma. And so, therefore, you won't repeat that cycle. Part of the reason why people can't and have struggled with breaking generational curses is because they focus on what has happened generationally in their family instead of focusing on what should have changed and what they have the power to change now. Because if you focus on that curse continues. But if you focus on breaking the cycle and what part of it needs to be broken, then that's the part that's going to come to fruition. And so instead of feeling like you need to hold somebody accountable, part of healing your trauma is holding yourself accountable to doing something differently. So that's the first thing. The second thing is you have to stop playing the victim and find your power. And that's kind of connected to that first one. So, yes, it happened to you. Yes, you were the victim of that situation, but you don't have to play the victim for life, right? So, if you were in a situation where you were verbally abused by an early partner, you could play the victim and you could continue to say, well, this is who I am because I was abused. This is how my life is because I was abused. But that gives the abuser all of the power over you. That gives them the power to continue to dictate your narrative, even if they're not even in your vicinity, because their abuse has lingered so long. The things that have happened to you inside of your trauma have lingered so long that they're now controlling your future. They're not just things that happened to you in the past, they're things that you brought with you into your present. That person, therefore, is now in your present, even if they're not physically in your vicinity. And therefore, those things are dictating what's happening in the future. And so, your power is in the fact that you can stop any behavior from happening right now in the space that you're in. So, if you don't want to continue to be plagued by the things that happened to you in the past, you can stop being plagued by them. You go see a therapist, you have, some inner work structures that you use, you do yoga, you meditate, whatever it is, you have the power to stop what's going on in your mind from happening. You can stop a thought. You can stop creating a narrative that isn't in your present day. And so when we play the victim role, the victim has to have a narrative that creates their victimhood. And so we have to continue to tell this story. Otherwise, people will never know that we're a victim of the situation. But when you take your power back to be a victor, then you no longer have to tell that story anymore. You can say, a part of my story is that this happened to me, but now and in the future I will be, because that's where you find your power. I think that if I continue to tell the story of the things that have happened to me in relationship and in familial systems, then I would still be a product of those things instead of someone who has overcome those things. And that's not to say that I'm perfect in any shape or form, because perfectionism still runs heavily in my veins. And there are certain things that I am for sure self-assessing and working on. But what it does say is that those things no longer create those situations in my present day. I'm dealing with the remnants of their past situations, but they're not plaguing me today. I'm just fixing the behaviors and moving forward, much like we talked about, and breaking free from the cycle. And so, if you want to play the role of the victor in your situation, the survivor in your situation, you don't want to talk about what happened to you anymore, then what you're going to have to do is change that victimhood mentality. And what you'll notice is you start to walk in behaviors, moods, mindsets that make you no longer affected by those situations from your past. You can still admit that they were part of them, but they're not making you walk a different way today. Therefore, you're not taking them into your future. And the third thing is to stop talking about it and change your actions, patterns, and habits. So the more we talk about, and this, let me preface this by saying, this is not to say don't share your story, because I believe that your testimony can bring other people out of bondage more powerfully than anything else. So I'm not saying don't share your story. It's the way that you're talking about it that shapes and molds what the intention behind it is and how it affects the people around you. So if you're talking about it from a space of, can you believe this person did this thing to me? I can't believe that this person is such a villain, and you're painting them as a picture of the villain, then you're still speaking from a place of trauma. You're still in the trauma. You're telling the story to gain access to other people's sympathy and emotions. But when you're telling the story from a place of power, like, yes, this happened to me and I still stand and I, navigated out of it, or, God helped me navigate out of it, or whatever your story is, then you're not telling it to gain an emotional response for you. You're telling them to create a catalyst for change for them. So you're using your story to help people, as opposed to using your story to help heal your trauma inside of you. Because trying to gain and elicit sympathy and empathy is really just trying to get the internal validation to heal what's inside of you. And if you don't change those actions and patterns, like gossiping about the person who did this to you, or continuously looking on their social media pages to try to see if they leveled up, or wanting bad things for them because they did something bad to you, etc. Um, paint triangulation so that other people think they're just as bad as you do and have that same opinion of them as you do. Like, all of these things are habits that you've created in the past because you were in your trauma. If you want to be out of your trauma, if you want to be healed from your trauma, then you have to deal with the hurt that's inside of you. And then that person no longer exists, because the hurt that they placed on you, the hurt that has festered inside of you, no longer has a source, because that person's no longer there. So you get to tend to the hurt instead of tending to the annihilation of the character of the other person. Because if that's the pattern that you've created, then you don't have enough attention, time, or focus to tend to what's hurting inside of you, because you're so keenly focused on hurting them. And so when you think about no longer talking about the situation at hand, it's in a malicious way. It's the kind of talk about it that continues to perpetuate the trauma, the hurt, the pain, the victimhood, the villainhood, etc. And what are some patterns that exist in that? Well, if you're coming home from work, do you get on the phone and start gossiping about the person? Do you um, sit in solitude so that you can drown in your emotions, because that feels better than being open and vulnerable to other people? These are the patterns. That you listen to sad music because it helps you to get it out, and then, once you've cried enough, then you can move past that emotional dysregulation of the day. All patterns and habits that you have to focus on, assess, and think about how you can shift out of them. And again, these are mile markers on the journey, because if you slip up today and that pattern happens and you do that thing again, then now you can come back to that mile marker and say, okay, I need to change some patterns and behaviors, because these patterns and behaviors are of old and they're not going to take me to the new space that I want to go in a healing motion. And on the healing journey, they're going to keep me in where I've been for, as long as I can remember. So the last one, and number 4, is stop waiting for the validation of other people and validate and regulate your own emotions. So when we tell stories, or when we wait for somebody to apologize for their misbehaviors, we're really looking for validation. Somebody tell me that what I feel is real, and somebody tell me that what I feel deserves a response from the person who did it to me. And though it's real, and though it may deserve a response from them, if they never give it to you, will you give them the power of continuing to forge forward and spin your wheels to gain the validation of their sorry? Or will you take the power of the situation and say, I don't need to be validated by other people. I know this happened to me, and here's how I'm going to forge forward in power, as opposed to continuing to be in this place of pity. And how do I regulate my own emotions? If that person were to trigger me, how am I changing the way that I'm allowing people to trigger me? How am I venturing into a space where I don't have as many buttons that can be pushed? How am I hugging on and loving on my inner child so that she feels taken care of, as opposed to her throwing temper tantrums because I haven't reached back to her yet, because I'm so keenly focused on the hurt that I'm not focused on the healing? So these are the four things that I think are my guideposts, mile markers, whatever it is, that they help me to get back on track on the journey if I've lost my way. Because when you're healing trauma, it's not this linear journey, right? There are going to be several times where you lose your footing. There are going to be several times where you get off the trail and you have to come back to it. But if you can figure out how to stop blaming people and what are your behaviors to be a cycle breaker, if you can figure out how to stop playing victim and to become the power inside of your situation, the person who has the power inside of your situation, if you can figure out how to change your habits and behaviors that are keeping you in that perpetuating that situation of trauma. And if you can stop looking for that validation externally and learning how to validate yourself and manage your own emotions, then yes, there are a ton of other ways to heal your trauma, but those four will help you find your way back to the journey of navigating that space of healing as opposed to wandering and being feral in a place of trauma and continuing the same things and habits that you've always done. So, thank you guys for listening. If you find yourself in a space where you're looking to heal and you don't know where to start, definitely reach out to me. If you listened to this video and it was helpful to you, please remember to subscribe, share the video. Remember that if we listen to something and we gain knowledge or wisdom about something, if we keep it to ourselves, that's selfish. But we share with other people, then perhaps we can be part of the catalyst for change in their life, sharing wisdom with them that helps them get out of the bondage that's keeping them stuck inside of their trauma. And that's why I share my story. That's why I continue to create videos, because I know that I wish that I would have had somebody to navigate me through the process that I was going through much sooner. So I wouldn't have wasted so much time being in this state of pain and hurt and continuing the cycles and not breaking free from them. So make sure you like and share. Make sure you reach out to me on all social media platforms. I love you guys and I appreciate you for tuning in every week. And I will see you again next week.